decision process went down with the band?
None.
Really?
No.
Stevie Nicks, the voice of mystery, magic, and heartbreak. Her songs painted dreams, her presence defined a generation, and her spirit made her one of the most iconic figures in rock history. But behind the shawls, the spotlight, and the music that seemed larger than life, there was always another story, one tied inseparably to Lindsey Buckingham. Their love, their battles, and their art fueled Fleetwood Mac's greatest triumphs, but also its deepest fractures. For decades, Stevie let the music tell the tale, refusing to say what she truly felt, leaving fans to read between the lines of lyrics and rumors. But now, at 77, Stevie Nicks finally opens up. And what she reveals about Lindsey Buckingham doesn't just revisit Fleetwood Mac's turbulent past. It forces fans to see it in a new, startling light. What did she finally confess after all these years? Stay with us as we find out. When Stevie Nicks first crossed paths with Lindsey Buckingham, their story carried the shimmer of a rock and roll fairy tale. Two young dreamers, bound by music and ambition. They seemed destined to climb the mountain together. Their voices intertwined like threads of fate, fragile yet unbreakable, fragile yet unyielding. The chemistry was undeniable, the bond magnetic. To outsiders, they looked like a couple pulled from myth, two lovers whose shared passion would propel them to greatness. It began humbly, in the suburbs of California. Nicks, with her ethereal presence and raw, poetic lyricism, found in Buckingham not just a partner, but a mirror. His intricate guitar work and perfectionist ear gave form to her mystical visions. Together, they crafted harmonies that felt less like collaboration and more like destiny unfolding in sound. They were young, broke, and clinging to the belief that music could save them from the ordinary. But fairy tales often conceal shadows. What began as youthful love soon transformed into something darker, heavier. Ambition has a way of sharpening every edge, and jealousy thrives in the cracks of intimacy. Their shared hunger for success drew them closer, while simultaneously planting the seeds of conflict. Together, they forged songs of haunting beauty. But beneath the surface, cracks spread like lightning across their relationship. Every rehearsal carried both electricity and tension, and every performance blurred the line between passion and resentment. By the early 1970s, they had taken their bond into the studio, releasing the modest album Buckingham Nicks. Though it failed commercially, it revealed their extraordinary synergy. The record showcased their unique alchemy, his crisp guitar lines weaving seamlessly through her dreamlike storytelling. For those who listened closely, it was clear. This duo had something that could not be replicated. They weren't just making music, they were giving voice to each other's unspoken desires and hidden wounds. Yet success remained elusive, and with financial struggles mounting, their partnership strained. The innocence of their early days gave way to long nights of doubt, arguments over direction, and the slow, steady erosion of trust. Still, neither could walk away. For better or worse, they were bound, not only by love, but by a sense that their music together was bigger than either of them alone. That belief was tested when Fleetwood Mac came calling. Mick Fleetwood, searching for a new guitarist, heard Buckingham's playing and immediately extended an invitation. Buckingham, however, came with a condition. He wouldn't join without Stevie. The decision would alter rock history forever. Overnight, the two lovers, weary from struggle, found themselves thrust into the heart of a band that was already a swirling storm of personalities and egos. Fleetwood Mac was supposed to be their salvation, a stage where love and art could coexist, where their partnership could finally blossom in the light of success. Instead, it became the crucible that tested their limits. The very songs that carried them to immortality were born from pain, betrayal, and the unraveling of the bond that had once felt eternal. For Stevie, the band offered both freedom and confinement. Her mystical songwriting and haunting voice finally had a platform, but it also meant living every day in proximity to a lover who was becoming a stranger. For Lindsey, the band gave him the recognition he had long craved. Yet it also chained him to a relationship that was slipping through his fingers. What they had built together became both their greatest triumph and their deepest wound, as Fleetwood Mac and later Rumours catapulted them to superstardom. The fairy tale unraveled in plain sight. The same magnetic pull that once united them now turned toxic, feeding jealousies, infidelities, and a slow-motion collapse that would play out across stages and studios around the world. Their story was no longer one of harmony, but of tension so raw it became the very fuel for one of the greatest bands in rock history. What began as a dream partnership spiraled into a storm so turbulent it threatened to destroy them both. And yet, through it all, their music endured. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful art emerges not from peace, but from the heart of chaos. The mid-1970s were a turning point, not just for Fleetwood Mac, but for rock music itself. When Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined the band in 1975, they weren't merely adding 2 new members, they were adding accelerants to a fire that had already been smoldering. Fleetwood Mac, once a blues-driven British outfit, suddenly found itself transformed into something sleeker, sharper, and infinitely more combustible. Stevie brought an ethereal mystique, her voice carrying the haunting quality of someone channeling secrets from another realm. Lindsey, on the other hand, was all precision and edge, a perfectionist with razor-sharp instincts and a vision that often bordered on obsession. Together, they didn't just reshape Fleetwood Mac's sound, they catapulted the band into a league the world had never heard before. Almost immediately, the results were undeniable. The band's self-titled 1975 album yielded hits that would become timeless classics. Rhiannon, with its mystical imagery and Nicks's hypnotic delivery, introduced audiences to a new kind of rock sorcery. Landslide, written by Stevie in a moment of deep introspection, revealed vulnerability that resonated across generations. And all of it was anchored by Lindsey's meticulous arrangements, his ability to sculpt raw ideas into songs that were both commercially irresistible and artistically sophisticated. Fleetwood Mac wasn't just relevant again, they were dominant. But behind the curtain, the price of that dominance began to reveal itself. Success is never neutral. It magnifies everything it touches. For Stevie and Lindsey, the pressures of fame didn't soften their flaws, they sharpened them into weapons. Lindsey's controlling nature in the studio, once a strength, soon collided with Stevie's blossoming independence. She was no longer content to be the ethereal partner standing in his shadow. She was becoming a star in her own right, and with that rise came a clash of egos that neither could contain. Their personal love story, once the foundation of their musical bond, began to fracture under the weight of ambition and unspoken betrayals. The devotion that had fueled their early years dissolved into resentment. Lindsey bristled at Stevie's growing autonomy and her increasing reliance on her own vision, while Stevie tired of Lindsey's need for control and his relentless perfectionism. What had once been symbiosis turned into a Cold War, fought not with silence, but with songs. And yet, paradoxically, it was this unraveling that gave birth to their greatest work, The music became both outlet and weapon. Each lyric was no longer just a melody, but a battlefield. Rhiannon dripped with mystical defiance, Landslide whispered of doubt and longing, and countless other songs became coded messages between lovers turned rivals. Their harmonies, so seamless on stage, masked the jagged emotions clawing at them behind closed doors. For the audience, none of this was visible. To the world, Fleetwood Mac looked untouchable, a band riding a wave of unprecedented success, their sound polished to brilliance. But fans could feel something different in the music. The records didn't just sound good, they felt lived in. They carried a rawness that couldn't be faked, a bruised beauty born out of conflict. Even those who had no idea of the turmoil behind the scenes sensed it. This was music carved directly from heartbreak. The irony was inescapable. As the songs soared higher up the charts, their personal bond sank deeper into ruin. The very connection that had once bound them together now seemed to exist only in fragments, etched into melodies that played out their unraveling for millions to hear. Each performance was a paradox. On stage, they were a united front, weaving harmonies so perfect it seemed impossible they were at war. Off stage, they were tearing apart at the seams. And soon, the betrayals that had whispered in shadows would no longer be hidden. They would be shouted into microphones, pressed into vinyl, and immortalized on the grooves of an album that would not just define Fleetwood Mac, but define an era. That album, forged in pain and brilliance, would become both their masterpiece and their curse. For Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, passion had always been their greatest weapon. On stage, their chemistry was undeniable, a magnetic force that transfixed audiences. Every glance, every harmony carried an electricity that blurred the line between music and intimacy. In the studio, that same passion was the fire that turned ideas into timeless songs, fueling masterpieces that seemed to pour straight from their souls. But passion is a dangerous flame. It gives warmth, yes, but when it turns, it burns. By the mid-1970s, that fire was no longer a comfort. Their relationship, already strained by the pressures of fame, began to sour in ways that no melody could disguise. Success didn't bring them closer. It magnified every flaw. Lindsey's sharp tongue, once part of his relentless drive for perfection, cut deeper than any ordinary lover's quarrel. He demanded precision, control, obedience to his vision. Stevie, whose very essence thrived on freedom and mysticism, felt trapped under his weight. The very qualities that once drew them together, his discipline, her wild spirit, now became irreconcilable. Love curdled into jealousy. Tenderness hardened into spite. Their romance, once a fountain of creativity, turned into a cycle of destruction. Each argument bled into rehearsals. Each cold silence echoed in the studio. What had once been whispered endearments became barbed critiques and stinging accusations. And yet, for all the bitterness, they couldn't truly escape each other. The band tied them together like iron chains. The music demanded their collaboration, even as their hearts screamed for separation. Every look across the stage carried with it a history of wounds. A fleeting smile might mask resentment. A missed glance could reopen old hurts. The audience, lost in the swell of Fleetwood Mac's harmonies, saw only magic. But for Stevie and Lindsey, every performance was a battlefield disguised as a love song. They sang through clenched teeth, bled through microphones, and turned their private war into a public spectacle. Though few fans realized what they were really witnessing. Their arguments were not confined to hotel rooms or whispered after midnight. They spilled openly into rehearsals, into recording sessions, into the very air the band breathed. Engineers and bandmates became unwilling witnesses to a relationship in ruins. Stevie's songs, dripping with veiled heartbreak, became daggers aimed squarely at Lindsey. Lindsey's compositions, layered with bitterness and anger, returned the blow. Each track they recorded together was both a confession and a condemnation. And still, the irony persisted. The worse their relationship became, the better the music sounded. The band was caught in a paradox that would define their legacy. Out of the ashes of their crumbling love came songs so raw, so authentic, that they transcended the personal pain that birthed them. The music wasn't just about melody anymore, it was about survival. Each lyric was an outlet for rage or sorrow. Each harmony a fragile truce hammered into shape for the sake of the art. To the fans, Fleetwood Mac was a dream. The image projected was glamorous, almost mythic. 5 extraordinary musicians conjuring a sound that was at once tender and thunderous. But to Stevie and Lindsey, Fleetwood Mac had become a cage. It trapped them in a cycle they could not escape, forcing them to relive their heartbreak night after night under the bright glare of the spotlight. They loved the music, yes, they loved the adoration, but they hated the way it bound them to each other, unable to fully break free. Passion, once intoxicating, had turned into poison. That poison seeped into every rehearsal, every concert, every late-night session in the studio. It soaked into the very veins of the record they were making. And in the end, it gave birth to Rumours, an album that would immortalize their heartbreak, expose their wounds to the world, and seal their fate in the annals of rock history. What destroyed them personally elevated them musically, leaving behind a masterpiece forged from pain, betrayal, and a love too fierce to ever truly die. The making of Rumours has gone down in history not just as the birth of one of rock's greatest albums, but as one of the most brutal, emotionally charged recording processes ever endured by a band. To outsiders, the finished product gleams with harmony and polish, a timeless piece of art that defined an era. But to those who lived inside the walls of the studio, it was nothing less than a battlefield. Every note was sharpened by conflict, every lyric etched with betrayal, jealousy, or rage. For Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, the studio wasn't a sanctuary. It was a war zone. Lindsey's perfectionism was legendary, but during these sessions, it became unbearable. He demanded take after take, dissecting every chord, every harmony, every guitar lick, until exhaustion crushed even the most patient bandmate. He had a vision for what Rumours needed to be, and he was willing to drag the entire band through hell to achieve it. For some, that drive was admirable. For Stevie, it was torture. Not only did she feel trapped by Lindsey's relentless control, but every interaction with him was laced with the bitterness of their broken relationship. She wasn't just recording music. She was being forced to relive the collapse of their love, over and over again, in front of the world. What made it worse was how directly the music reflected their crumbling bond. Songs weren't abstract expressions of feeling, they were daggers hurled across the studio floor. Stevie's Dreams wasn't just a song, it was a direct answer to Lindsey's searing, "Go your own way." Each lyric was a confrontation, a line of attack that couldn't be ignored. Lindsey accused her of leaving him behind, sneering, "Packing up, shacking up's all you want to do." Stevie countered with an ethereal warning, reminding him that even in dreams, freedom comes at a cost. The tension didn't just simmer, it crackled, filling the studio air with sparks that could ignite at any moment. And Stevie and Lindsey weren't alone in their misery. Christine and John McVie were in the midst of a devastating divorce. Mick Fleetwood, the band's towering drummer, was battling his own heartbreak after discovering his wife's affair. Betrayal layered upon betrayal, wound upon wound. By all logic, the band should have collapsed under the weight of its dysfunction. Yet, perversely, the very chaos that tore them apart fueled their brilliance. Each track on Rumours became a confession, a confrontation, or a cry for survival. The sessions often stretched late into the night, drenched in alcohol, clouded with drugs, fueled by adrenaline and spite. Arguments erupted mid-song, only to be smothered when the tape started rolling. They might scream at each other one moment, then deliver flawless harmonies the next. It was as if the music itself demanded their cooperation, no matter how much they despised one another outside the vocal booth. The push and pull of their emotions, love, hate, passion, resentment, bled into every groove of the record. For Stevie and Lindsey, the wounds were raw. Each song widened the gulf between them, pushing them further apart, even as the music tied them together. Stevie described it as being trapped in a cage she couldn't escape. The very man who had once been her muse was now her tormentor, and yet she couldn't stop singing alongside him. Lindsey, meanwhile, poured his fury into the guitar, bending strings like they were extensions of his rage. The irony is that the more their lives unraveled, the tighter the music became. The harmonies were pristine, the instrumentation flawless. What should have been chaos instead became perfection, because the stakes were too high to fail. Fleetwood Mac wasn't just recording an album, they were recording their legacy. Looking back, it's almost unthinkable that such beauty could come from so much pain. But that was the alchemy of Rumours. It was forged not in joy or harmony, but in fire. A masterpiece born of heartbreak, betrayal, and emotional warfare. And though it catapulted the band into immortality, the scars it left on Stevie and Lindsey would never truly heal. The recording sessions didn't just document their unraveling, they accelerated it. By the time the album was finished, they were no longer lovers, no longer even friends. They were battle-scarred veterans of a war fought in lyrics, riffs, and melodies. And though the world would come to celebrate Rumours as the soundtrack of a generation, Stevie and Lindsey knew the truth. The price of its brilliance had been nothing less than their love itself. When Rumours hit the shelves in 1977, it was more than an album. It was a confession. Fans heard the heartbreak in every verse, the bitterness in every chorus. What they didn't know was just how personal those words were. The songs weren't metaphors, they were daggers aimed at specific hearts. Lindsey's Go Your Own Way was a scathing dismissal of Stevie, laced with accusations she couldn't forgive. Stevie's Dreams countered with haunting defiance, her ethereal voice masking the rage beneath. Christine McVie's You Make Loving Fun was written about an affair, twisting the knife into her ex-husband John, who still had to play bass on it. The entire album was less a collaboration than a collective airing of grievances, turned into art. The lies and betrayals behind those songs were known within the band, whispered among insiders. But to the outside world, the truth trickled out slowly. Tabloids speculated, fans wondered, and critics marveled. Fleetwood Mac had transformed personal devastation into universal anthems. But the cost was staggering. For Stevie and Lindsey, Rumours didn't just capture their heartbreak, it cemented it in history. Every time they performed those songs, they relived the wounds, reopening scars that had never healed. And while the world saw only the brilliance, the band itself was drowning in the very heartbreak it had immortalized. By the time Rumours exploded into a global phenomenon, Selling millions of copies and dominating the charts, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham's relationship was beyond repair. What remained between them was not love, but a shared duty. To the music, to the band, and to the legacy they were building, even as it destroyed them. The breakup was not a single moment, but a slow unraveling, pulled thread by thread, until nothing remained. Their fights were vicious, their silences heavier still. Yet when they stepped on stage, they delivered performances drenched in raw emotion, the kind only possible because of the pain simmering beneath. The audience saw chemistry. The band felt the fractures. Ironically, the very breakup that shattered them personally became the fuel for their greatest professional triumph. Without that heartbreak, Rumours might never have been born. Without that agony, those songs might never have carried such devastating power. But triumph came with a price. Stevie and Lindsey were bound together, not by love, but by the weight of a masterpiece that chained them to their past. The breakup had freed them from each other's arms, but condemned them to relive the story forever. Every concert, every interview, every reunion would circle back to the same painful truth. Their greatest gift to the world was born from their greatest personal loss. To the fans, watching Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham perform together was electric. She, the mystical songbird in flowing shawls and velvet, spinning across the stage like a conjured spirit. He, the intense guitarist with fire in his fingers and fury in his eyes. Together, they created a storm, a magnetism so palpable it felt like watching love itself unfold in real time. But that chemistry wasn't love. It was something far darker, the tension of two people forever bound by wounds that never healed. Stevie has admitted that when she sang to Lindsey, she wasn't always singing with affection. Sometimes she was singing to remind him of the pain he caused, to throw his betrayals back in his face, to reclaim her power. Lindsey, in turn, often sang with a venomous edge, channeling his rage into guitar solos so sharp they could cut air. The audience, of course, only saw the sparks, mistaking bitterness for passion, heartbreak for longing, and perhaps that was the cruelest irony of all. Their pain was entertainment. Every glare across the stage, every almost touch, every harmony dripping with old wounds became part of the show. Behind the scenes, bandmates often winced. Mick Fleetwood recalled the tension so thick it felt like another member of the group. The chemistry that mesmerized the world was, in reality, a performance fueled by anger, regret, and the ashes of a love that could never be rekindled. The truth was simple. Their on-stage magic was real, but it came from the deepest scars of their history. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the whirlwind of fame consumed Fleetwood Mac. Money poured in, but so did drugs, excess, and destructive behavior that further poisoned already strained relationships. Cocaine wasn't just a party drug for the band, it was a daily ritual, a dangerous escape that blurred emotions and sharpened resentments. For Stevie, cocaine nearly destroyed her. She later admitted that the drug was so entangled in her life during the band's peak that it became both a crutch and a curse. It numbed the pain of Lindsey, the betrayals within the band, and the exhaustion of endless touring. But it also pushed her toward the brink of collapse. Lindsey wasn't immune either, his temper often magnified under the haze of drugs, his need for control growing more unbearable as the band spiraled deeper into dysfunction. The betrayals weren't limited to Stevie and Lindsey's fractured love. Affairs ran rampant within the group. Mick Fleetwood himself entered into a brief affair with Stevie, further fracturing the fragile dynamics. What should have destroyed the band instead became fuel for even more emotional music. But the cost was immense. Relationships shattered. Health declined, and trust was obliterated. Fame magnified everything. What could have been quiet heartbreaks became front-page scandals. Every whispered affair, every drunken fight, every overdose scare became part of the Fleetwood Mac mythology. And at the center of it all remained Stevie and Lindsey, locked in a cycle of betrayal and dependence that neither could truly escape. By the late 1990s, Fleetwood Mac had splintered and reformed multiple times. Solo careers rose and fell, band members drifted in and out, and the weight of decades of history seemed impossible to overcome. But in 1997, something remarkable happened. The dance. The reunion tour and live album weren't just commercial successes. They were cultural events. Fans old and new packed arenas, eager to see the legendary band together once more. And when Stevie and Lindsey stepped on stage, singing the very songs that had once chronicled their destruction, the world held its breath. Their performances reignited everything: the longing, the anger, the nostalgia. Stevie sang Landslide with tears in her eyes, her voice cracking as Lindsey's guitar gently accompanied her. To the audience, it felt like forgiveness, a rekindling of love. But backstage, the old wounds reopened. Stevie admitted that standing beside Lindsey once again was both healing and excruciating. The history between them couldn't be erased. It lingered in every glance, every lyric. The reunion was not a resolution, but a reminder. They could play the songs, they could smile for the cameras, they could even share moments of tenderness on stage. But the damage remained. The same heartbreak that fueled Rumours still haunted them, proving that some wounds don't heal, no matter how much time passes. And yet, the world couldn't look away. Their story, messy, tragic, and beautiful, was written into every note they played. For decades, Stevie Nicks remained guarded. She sang her truths in lyrics, veiled in metaphor and melody, but rarely did she strip it bare in interviews. Lindsey Buckingham was always the ghost in the room, the shadow that haunted her successes, the name she could never escape. And yet, even as the years stretched on, she never fully told the story. Until now. At 77, Stevie finally opened up, not in a fleeting comment, not in cryptic song lyrics, but in her own words. She admitted the truth fans had always suspected. Lindsey was both the greatest love of her life and her deepest wound. She confessed that their connection went beyond romance. It was creative, spiritual, and eternal in ways she couldn't sever, no matter how much pain it caused. But she also admitted that Lindsey's temper, his control, and his betrayals left scars that would never heal. He was her muse and her tormentor, the man who made her stronger by breaking her heart. And in that brutal honesty, Stevie gave the world the final piece of the story. Her words weren't about bitterness anymore. They were about acceptance. She no longer carried Lindsey as a weight, but as part of her history, part of what shaped her into the woman and the artist she became. The truth, at last, wasn't about revenge. It was about release. Fans heard her words and felt the shift. This wasn't Stevie clinging to the past. It was Stevie finally setting herself free. At 77, she didn't just open up about Lindsey Buckingham. She closed a chapter of rock history that had captivated the world for nearly half a century. And in that moment, the legend of Fleetwood Mac wasn't just about music anymore. It was about survival, forgiveness, and the truth that even the deepest wounds can eventually find peace. If love fuels creation, what does heartbreak leave behind? At 77, Stevie Nicks finally opens up about Lindsey Buckingham, but the weight of her words lingers differently for every listener. Before history turns pain into poetry, remember, even the greatest songs hide truths between the lines. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.